When Strange New World's newest episode, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, was released, I had no idea the amount of damage that this episode, along with Picard Season 2, would do to the Star Trek timeline as well as to the canon timeline. And I know to a lot of people out there, they're both the same thing. And to some people out there, they don't really care. They just want a good episode. But that's not me. I actually do care about the history because I was brought up with this and it is so important to me. And I do believe that this episode caused problems. So if you've seen the episode, you know that Lan Noonien Singh, excuse me, was transported to an alternate timeline to get the help of Captain Kirk, and then they both were transported back to the 21st century along Lan Noonien Singh's timeline to stop a catastrophe which was going to take place at any moment. Come to find out that the Romulans have been transported back in time to interfere with Earth's development and, more to the point, stop them from becoming Starfleet. She tells the story that Romulans have been transported back to affect the timeline and alter events to try and, as I said before, stop them. She tells the story about how she has been stuck in this time period since 1992, when she was supposedly supposed to stop Khan from becoming this monster that he became, this warlord, and has been stuck in this time period for 30 years, waiting for her shot to get at him. She even says there's been temporal wars over this event. And no matter how hard they try or any other beings try, time seems to interfere and slowly makes these events happen. So sooner or later, Khan is going to start up his eugenics wars. But there is a problem here with this whole story. As we all know, if you've seen the show, you know this episode. If you've seen it, you know that Lan stops her and goes back to her time. Everything's back to normal. But the problem is that should not have happened. Just because Lan stopped her from killing off Khan doesn't mean the timeline wasn't seriously damaged. And it was damaged. So I am going to provide you with some proof that the timeline was damaged. And more to the point, the writers of this story were not either paying attention to what went on in Picard Season 2 or just didn't really give a care. So please follow me as I present what I believe to be pretty good evidence to this. So let's get started with this by going back in the Star Trek timeline to the original timeline of Khan Noonien Singh. In 1959, Khan Noonien Singh was born and was considered to be one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful, supermen of the time. He was the most ambitious and most resilient and violent of all the augments from the eugenics wars. From 1992 to 1996, Khan was the absolute ruler of a quarter of the world, from Asia to the Middle East. Now, that is a heck of an impressive resume to have on anyone's shoulders, but in 1996, him and the rest of the augmentations, they were defeated, and Khan and his people secretly escaped Earth in the Botany Bay. The people of Earth would spend the next 30 years fighting amongst each other. Factions against factions, factions against governments, governments against governments, people not trusting their governments, food supplies breaking down, water supplies being poisoned. The world would be eventually thrown into chaos, eventually resulting in a nuclear war beginning in 2026, which would last till 2053, a nuclear winter. As I said before, in 2053, that would be pretty much the end of the nuclear winter. Society would begin emerging and starting to rebuild itself. And 10 years after that, 2063, Zefram Cochrane would lead a group of people to use a nuclear missile as an experimental vessel for the warp drive. The warp drive ship, also known as the Phoenix, which would usher in a new era for the entire world. And as we all know, if it wasn't for Zephyr Cochrane and the Phoenix going through that warp drive and that warp jump, the Vulcans would never have detected that ship or its warp. The Vulcans coming to Earth would change the destiny of not only the people of Earth, but eventually the whole quadrant. As I said to you before, I believe that the writers of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, as well as Picard Season 2, have set the timeline into a complete disarray. The canon universe has been completely messed up. And in this article here from Inverse, they are going to point out things that are somewhat true, but I disagree with some of it. Here, Star Trek is using time travel to fix a canon problem and sets a brilliant new precedent. Well, let's get into that for a moment, and I promise you I am not reading the whole article. Strange New Worlds is now asserting that Khan was a little kid in the 2020s, meaning he didn't rise to power until far later. The episode Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow is rewriting a tricky bit of Star Trek backstory, but don't freak out. This doesn't really change anything, but it does give Star Trek a new playbook. Well, I will get into that in a moment, because they're wrong. The episode's climax finds Luan Noonien Singh, Khan's 23rd century descendant, faced with having to prevent a time-traveling Romulan agent from killing Khan as a child and changing the history of the Federation. Without the eugenics wars caused by Khan and the ensuing dark times for Earth, the rebirth of humanity and first contact with the Vulcans of 2063 couldn't happen. But if Khan left Earth in 1996, how is he still a young boy in the secret Toronto facility in the 2020s? The part of the article that I find interesting here is the idea of a temporal wars. Raging in the background of Trek has been around for a long time, but was almost predominantly established in Voyager and in Enterprise. In Enterprise, a character named Daniels assisted Captain Archer in the 2150s and suggested that there were several factions and temporal wars spanning centuries. In Discovery, Season 2, we learned that the Federation war is an arm race against the Klingons to develop time travel out of fear of the Klingons changing history. And in Discovery Season 3, it was discovered that in the 32nd century, time travel was outlawed. Back in 2022, when Jean-Luc and the gang were having an outing in 2024, basically Picard Season 2, Picard showrunner Terry Matalas suggests that it is possible Spock's records in Space Heat were inaccurate. We came to a conclusion that World War III, that were several EMP bursts that kicked everyone back decades. Matalas said records of the 75-year period, the 90s, were sketchy. Maybe Spock was wrong. Maybe Spock got it wrong. Okay, well, if that's the case, and we have them arguing that Lon and Kirk went back in time to 2022, then someone needs to explain to me this little piece of information that came from Picard Season 2, the last episode, when Dr. Noonien Singh decides to activate the Khan Project. Now, let's not forget that back on Picard Season 2, Dr. Singh was experimenting with genetics. At the end of the episode, he breaks out the Khan Project, which was published in June of 1996. So help me out here. If Khan is a child in 2022, a 10-year-old child in 2022, how can the project be initiated in 2024? Between Picard Season 2 and Strange New Worlds Season 2, the timeline doesn't make sense. It is completely screwed up. Okay, so this is the part where I say the problem exists. And I'm going to go along with Strange New Worlds and saying that Khan is a 10-year-old boy in 2022. So if that is the case, in 2022, Khan is 10 years old. So the eugenics wars, when he would seize power, would be in 2045. He would be 33 years old. If I'm doing the math correctly, he would become an absolute ruler of a quarter of the world in 2045. And in 2049, he would be at age 37, fleeing the Earth in the Botany Bay with his augment crew, and leaving the world behind in disarray for 30 years before a nuclear war. If we follow the same timeline, according to the Romulan history and the timeline, wants to make corrections. But here we go. So 30 years later, there would be a nuclear war. It would be 2079. And then that nuclear war and um, the nuclear winter, would last 27 years and end in 2106. And then in 2116, the Phoenix would launch. Okay, so now think about this. The Romulans were affecting time on Earth, not affecting it anywhere else. So while Earth's history was slowing down, or its progress toward creating the Federation, and its warp drive ship was delayed decades, the Vulcan timeline was not changed at all. So, the exact same year that the warp ship was supposed to make its jump in 2063, the Vulcans were traveling through the solar system. So, if the world is still in nuclear winter at the same time that the Vulcans are traveling through the system, then there is no first contact. Now, naturally, I'm sure once the ship was launched, the warp ship was launched, maybe it was detected by the Vulcans somewhere else, or maybe another race came to the planet. They have the opportunity to change the timeline, which they have already done. But the point is that Earth's history was delayed while the rest of the Alpha Quadrant's history remained on time, intact. So first contact technically should not have happened. So with Earth history delayed, does that mean all the principal players from the original Star Trek, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, all these characters, are they delayed 100 years? Or is it different people in these roles? Is there a new captain instead of Captain Kirk? Is there a new Vulcan, new Doctor? In other words, time has been altered. So, heck, is there even a Zephyrin Cochrane alive when the warp ship is created? My point is that the timeline has been seriously altered, and the Romulans did do the job. They did damage the timeline. So I'm going to end the video right here. I wanted to get this out there, my friends, because I really do think that the showrunners from Strange New Worlds screwed this up. And they have left the history, the timeline, the canon, all messed up. So tell me what you think. I would love to hear from you, my friends. Drop your comments below. Let me know. Until the next time, my friends, God bless.